After months of war, after 45,000 dead, after oil at $109 a barrel, after a nuclear plant bombed in the desert of Abu Dhabi, after the world's most important oil route effectively closed for nearly 3 months, after all of that, the document that could end it all is reportedly 1 page long. 1 page, 14 points, sitting in a room in Islamabad or Geneva, being negotiated at this moment by Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and several Iranian officials, while the entire Middle East watches whether two governments that have spent 3 months bombing each other can agree on 14 sentences that stop it all. And here is the most alarming thing about all of this. Nothing has been agreed yet. The sources briefed on the talks told Axios and confirmed to The Hill, Foreign Policy, Iran International, and the Times of Israel that this is the closest the two sides have been to an agreement since the war began. But closest does not mean agreed. The Strait of Hormuz is still effectively closed, oil is still at $107 per barrel, Iran still has 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, and the gap between what America wants Iran to do with it and what Iran says it will accept has not closed. 1 page, 14 points, everything on the table, and the signatures that would end this war may never come. This is Global Faultlines. I have spent the past 24 hours going through the full verified reporting from Axios, Times of Israel, Iran International, The Hill, Foreign Policy, and Time Magazine on what is inside this 1-page document, who is negotiating it, what the specific terms are, where the deal could break, and what happens to the world if it does. Stay with me, because the details of this 1 page matter more to the global economy and to the price of oil, food, gas, and the stability of the Middle East than almost any document you will hear about this year. Let us begin with exactly what is inside the proposed document, because the specifics of what is being offered and demanded reveal both how close and how far the two sides actually are. The proposed agreement is a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU. In diplomatic language, an MOU is not a treaty. It is not a final, binding, comprehensive agreement. It is a framework, a statement of mutual intent, a document that says, we agree enough to stop shooting and start talking properly. 14 points, 1 page. Being negotiated by Trump's envoys Steve Witkoff, who led the team that negotiated the Gaza hostage deal, and Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, together with several Iranian officials both directly and through Pakistani mediators. The U.S. expects an Iranian response on several key points within 48 hours, according to 2 U.S. officials and 2 additional sources briefed on the matter who spoke to Axios. Here is what the 14-point MOU reportedly contains. Point 1, the most significant. Iran would commit to a moratorium on nuclear enrichment. The country that the U.S. went to war to denuclearize would agree to stop enriching uranium for a defined period of time. Point 2, Iran would ship its stockpile of highly enriched uranium out of the country. Iran currently holds approximately 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. 90% purity is the threshold for weapons-grade material. That stockpile represents Iran's most sensitive nuclear asset, and the U.S. is demanding that it leave Iranian territory as a condition of any deal. Point 3. The United States agrees to lift some of its sanctions on Iran and release billions of dollars in frozen Iranian funds that have been held in accounts around the world. Point 4. Both sides agree to ease restrictions around transit through the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway through which 20% of global oil flows, and which has been effectively closed since early March. Point 5. The MOU declares an end to the war in the region and triggers a 30-day period of negotiations on a final, detailed agreement. Those 30 days would focus on 3 things: the final terms of reopening the Strait of Hormuz, the detailed framework for limiting Iran's nuclear program long-term, and the full lifting of U.S. sanctions. During those 30 days, as talks proceed, Iran's restrictions on shipping and the American naval blockade would both be gradually lifted. And here is the clause that every government in the region and every oil market on Earth is watching most closely. If the negotiations collapse during those 30 days, the United States would be able to restore the blockade and resume military action. That provision transforms the 30-day negotiation period into something more than a diplomatic opportunity. It is a 30-day countdown. If a deal is not reached within 30 days, the war resumes. Now let us examine the single most contested issue inside the 14 points, because it is the issue that could break this entire framework before the ink dries. The nuclear enrichment moratorium. How long must Iran stop enriching uranium? Iran has proposed 5 years. The United States has demanded 20 years. According to Axios, The Wall Street Journal, Foreign Policy, and Iran International, all citing multiple sources, the compromise being discussed is 12 to 15 years. 3 sources told The Hill that the moratorium would be at least 12 years. Another source said 15 years is the likely final number. The Wall Street Journal, citing an Iranian official, reported that one specific idea under discussion is halting enrichment for 12 to 15 years before allowing Iran to resume at a low level of 3.67% purity. That 3.67% figure matters. The IAEA recognized limit for civilian nuclear power purposes is around 5%. The weapons threshold begins to become meaningful at 20% and reaches critical mass, the level needed for a nuclear weapon, at 90%. At 3.67%, Iran would have a civilian nuclear energy program. No weapons capability, but sovereign enrichment rights. That is what Iran is fighting for. Not the bomb, not weapons grade, the right to enrich at any level at all. And the United States, in its current proposal, is saying, we can accept that, but only after 12 to 15 years of zero enrichment, and only if every violation extends the moratorium. The White House is also demanding 3 additional nuclear provisions that go beyond the moratorium duration. First, Iran must commit to never seeking a nuclear weapon. Iran has always publicly maintained it never sought one, so this provision is, from Tehran's perspective, simply a confirmation of their stated position. But making it a signed formal commitment with enforcement mechanisms is different from a stated policy. Second, Iran cannot operate underground nuclear facilities. Iran's most sensitive enrichment sites, including Fordow, buried deep inside a mountain to protect it from aerial strikes, would presumably be subject to this clause. The fate of Fordow under any deal is one of the most sensitive points on the Iranian side. Third, all nuclear sites would be required to submit to SNAP unannounced United Nations inspections. No notification required. No preparation time allowed. IAEA inspectors could arrive without warning and demand access. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, speaking to reporters Tuesday, framed it this way: if Tehran wants a civilian nuclear program, it is free to pursue one. The implication being, civilian nuclear power, yes, weapons capability, absolutely not. Now let us examine the critical warning embedded in every credible report about this MOU. The warning that makes this potentially explosive even if it is signed. Axios stated it directly. Many of the terms laid out in the memo would be contingent on a final agreement being reached during the 30-day period. This leaves the possibility of renewed war, or an extended limbo in which the hot war has stopped but nothing is truly resolved. That word, limbo, is the most important word in all of this. An MOU is not a treaty. It is not a final, binding, comprehensive agreement. It is a framework for talking. If both sides sign the one page, the strait begins to reopen, the sanctions begin to ease, the enrichment stops. But then the 30-day talks collapse over the final terms of the nuclear moratorium, or the exact scope of sanctions relief, or the future of Iran's enrichment infrastructure. The MOU's contingency clauses allow the U.S. to reimpose the blockade and resume military action, which means the world could find itself in this scenario. The war officially ends. Oil prices fall. The strait reopens. Relief flows through global energy markets. And then, 31 days later, the detailed negotiations collapse over Fordow, or over the duration of the moratorium, or over the definition of some sanctions lifted, and the blockade snaps back into place, and the military resumes. That is not peace. That is a pause with a 30-day expiry. The Pakistani mediator who spoke to Reuters captured the urgency. We will close this very soon. We are getting close. But the same sources who describe progress also acknowledge the gaps that remain. Iran proposed 5 years on the moratorium. America demanded 20. 12 to 15 is the compromise. Iran has not said yes to 12 to 15. America has not said yes to Iran's version of 12 to 15. These things sound close. They are close. But in arms control negotiations, in nuclear weapons discussions between countries that have spent 3 months in active war, close is not agreed. And agreed is not implemented. And implemented is not durable. Let us now examine the internal divisions on both sides that make even an initial agreement difficult, because this is the dimension of the story that most coverage is missing. On the Iranian side, the White House explicitly believes that Iran's leadership is divided. 2 U.S. officials told Axios directly that this division could complicate efforts to forge consensus across different factions. What does that mean in practice? Iran's political structure since the death of Supreme Leader Khamenei in the February 28th strikes has been operating without its most authoritative voice. Different factions, the hardline Revolutionary Guard commanders, the pragmatic diplomatic corps around Foreign Minister Arachi, the parliament, the economic technocrats who understand what sanctions relief would mean for ordinary Iranians, all of these groups have different calculations about what a deal should look like and what it is worth accepting. The Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, has the most to lose from any deal that limits Iranian nuclear capability and reduces Iranian leverage in the region. Every nuclear facility the IRGC oversees is a source of institutional power and budget and strategic relevance. A deal that freezes or eliminates those facilities is a deal that reduces IRGC power. The diplomatic track, Foreign Minister Arachi, the officials negotiating through Pakistani mediators, may be more willing to accept terms that the IRGC would resist. In a political system without a clearly established supreme leader to adjudicate between competing factions, that internal division is genuinely dangerous to the negotiating process. Even if Arachi agrees to something at the negotiating table, the IRGC's institutional resistance could prevent implementation. On the American side, some U.S. officials remain skeptical that even an initial deal will be reached, according to Axios. These are not fringe voices. These are officials inside the national security apparatus who have been watching these negotiations and who do not believe Iran will ultimately agree to what the MOU requires. Senator Naftali Bennett posted on X, hours before the MOU reporting broke, that the U.S. should finish what it started. He said continued negotiations without a forceful military response prolongs the conflict and emboldens Iran. So even if Witkoff and Kushner reach an agreement with their Iranian counterparts, the political durability of that agreement on the American side is not guaranteed. A Congress that deadlocked 212 to 212 on ending the war is not a Congress that will unanimously embrace a deal that leaves Iran with a nuclear program, even a temporarily frozen one. Let us zoom out to the strategic picture, because this is what Global Faultlines is here to provide. The proposed one-page MOU represents a specific and calculated attempt to do something that has never been done before in the history of U.S.-Iran relations. Reach an agreement that is comprehensive enough to end active hostilities and open the strait, while being narrow enough that both governments can claim it does not give away their core positions. Iran can say, "We did not give up the right to enrich uranium. We agreed to a temporary pause. After 12 to 15 years, we resume. Our nuclear sovereignty is preserved." America can say, "Iran is not enriching. Their stockpile is leaving the country. There will be snap IAEA inspections. They cannot go underground. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. The strait is reopening. We achieved the core war objective." Both sides can claim a version of victory. That is what makes this MOU structurally possible. But here is what the contingency clauses reveal about how fragile this structure actually is. The U.S. negotiators themselves built in an escape hatch. If the 30-day talks collapse, we can restore the blockade and resume military action. That is not the language of a side that is confident a durable deal is within reach. That is the language of a side that is buying time and managing optionality. Oil is at $107 per barrel. The strait is operating at a fraction of its peacetime capacity. A nuclear plant was struck in Abu Dhabi 12 days ago. Putin is signing 40 documents in Beijing declaring the American-led world order is ending. Against that backdrop, 2 governments are trying to agree on 14 sentences that pause a war without resolving the underlying conflict that caused it. Foreign policy described the gap precisely. Iran proposed a 5-year enrichment ban. The United States demanded 20. Washington wants to insert a provision that any violation would extend the moratorium. Iran has not accepted that provision. 5 years versus 20 years. Violation extension versus no extension. The entire geopolitical stability of the Middle East, the entire global energy price, is hanging on the difference between those two numbers and that one provision. Here is the question that the next 48 hours will answer. Iran was expected to respond on the key points within 48 hours of the Axios report on Wednesday, May 6th. That response, whatever it says, will determine whether one page is enough to end the most consequential energy crisis in the post-World War II era. If Iran says yes to the 12 to 15-year moratorium, yes to shipping out the enriched uranium, yes to SNAP inspections, yes to no underground facilities, then the 30-day clock starts. The strait begins to reopen. Oil begins to fall. The world begins to exhale. If Iran says no, or says yes to some points and no to others, then the stand-down that Gulf leaders bought with their phone calls to Trump runs out, and the military that has been instructed to be ready for a full, large-scale assault on a moment's notice gets its moment. The Pakistani mediator said, "We will close this very soon. We are getting close." The U.S. officials briefed on the talks said, "Nothing has been agreed." Some officials remain skeptical even an initial deal will be reached. Both statements are true, and they are simultaneously the most hopeful and most terrifying things that have been said about this war. 1 page, 14 points, 12 to 15 years of no enrichment, billions in frozen funds released, the strait reopened, a 30-day clock to finalize everything, or the war resumes. They said America and Iran would never reach a deal. That document is sitting on a table right now. Whether the signatures appear is the most important question in global geopolitics today. This is Global Faultlines. We track the forces shaping the world, not just the events, but the structural shifts those events reveal. What the one-page MOU represents is not just a diplomatic negotiation. It is a test of whether two governments, with irreconcilable public positions on nuclear enrichment and regional power, can find 14 sentences that each of them can live with. The world's energy system, its food prices, its inflation trajectory, and the stability of the Middle East for the next decade are riding on those 14 sentences. If today's analysis gave you a clearer picture of what is at stake, share it immediately. Subscribe. Come back tomorrow, because the 48-hour window is counting down, and when the answer comes, it will come fast. This is Global Faultlines. See beyond the headlines.